Thank you. Good morning, and I'll call this meeting to order. Acknowledge the commissioners on Microsoft Teams. And note that due to COVID-19, the commission is meeting virtually. The meeting is being streamed live on the Port's YouTube channel. If you have questions or a comment, please use the raise hand function to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak and that we keep this meeting an appropriate public meeting. I'll call for a motion and second for approval of the minutes of the regular commission meeting of April 14, 2021.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Pam, would you lead us through the vote, please?
Yes, Commissioners Alexander,
Present.
Kupro-Comas,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sampat, Commissioner Sampat, and Strader.
Aye.
Was that you, Commissioner Sampat?
Yes, I just got in
Very good.
the nick of time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Curtis, would you please provide the executive director's report?
You bet. Good morning, Madam President. Good morning, commissioners and guests. I'd like to start this morning by acknowledging our safety champions for the month at the Port. Again, as per every month, we've got a range of employees from throughout the organization who have been spending the time and energy and taking that extra moment to make sure that they and their coworkers and our business partners are being as safe as possible. So I just want to thank all of them for their commitment to safety. And Stan, if you're available, I'd love to have you do a safety message this morning.
Sure. Thanks, Curtis. My message today is that last week, the Port collaborated with our business line crafts and construction trade partners to recognize and celebrate Construction Safety Week. Construction Safety Week served to strengthen our commitment to holistic safety with the theme, be present, be focused, be safe. In construction, safety is a shared value and belief that the Port is aligned with. More than 70 national and global construction firms joined forces for Construction Safety Week with a single aim to inspire everyone in the industry to be leaders in safety. The plan for Construction Safety Week was to heighten awareness to safety attributes on each day of last week. On Monday, it was be present, be focused. Mental awareness is critically important for workers to stay safe. Mental distractions can rob a worker of their focus and lead to serious or deadly injuries. On Tuesday, it was healthy mind, healthy body. Being safe means paying attention to both mind and body. It extends beyond wearing a hard hat and safety glasses. It means recognizing how important mental health really is to everyone's overall safety. On Wednesday, it was be relentless. Preventing injuries means relentlessly paying attention to risk. And on Thursday, it was be safe, be well rested. Fatigue plays a key role in safety, so work to improve sleep quantity and quality. And on Friday, it was thank you. All workers are reducing risks and eliminating injuries in the industry while overcoming a pandemic. Every worker in our industry deserves a big thank you. Safety Week is a show of force, an opportunity for people, companies, and even competitors to work together and celebrate the incredibly hard work by people in the construction industry who make safety the foundation of everything they do. Occurring at port construction projects, job safety walks, recognition meals, and vendor safety product demonstrations occurred throughout the week to continue the safety dialogue, raise awareness to new tools, and celebrate safety successes. So I ask, if you do visit or work on one of our construction sites, be present, be focused, be safe. That's my message, Curtis.
Thank you, Stan. Really important message for us right now as the Port undertakes what is the biggest but also the most complex construction project in the state. It is a remarkable bunch of work. I'm grateful for the partnership we've got with our business partners and construction out there, and just hope that everyone stays safe. I appreciate your message this morning. Commissioners, by way of update, just some great news from April. Delta Airlines announced the launch of nonstop service from PDX to the new Terminal 2 at Seoul Inchon International Airport. Really great news for us to have a direct flight into South Korea starting in fall of this year. It is just an exciting market for us. I was able to travel out to Seoul with the governor now 18 months ago, shortly pre-pandemic, and it's just a very promising trade market for Oregon businesses. We're very excited about this. It's really a big win for Oregon's trade-dependent business community as well as our tourist industry, and which should really open up new opportunities for travelers and businesses in Asia. Once again, a short update on the Red Lot. The PDX Red Lot Clinic piloted a drive-up event last weekend where people were able essentially to just drive up and get vaccinated without an appointment. That is continuing this weekend. I actually have a volunteer shift this weekend. The idea is to really increase vaccine access, reduce barriers to vaccination, and help Oregonians who may find it difficult for whatever reason to make an appointment. So we are certainly urging the Port family and our friends and neighbors to get out there, get vaccinated. This is really the key to our economic recovery and to the health of our community. So interesting just data point for us out at the Red Lot. We've had more than 200,000 vaccine doses delivered at the Red Lot to date. Just an incredible piece of work, great staff work from the Port, but also the partners, OHSU and Red Cross, have done just a great job, and we're very proud of that work. Inside the airport, concessionaire updates. While we closed a couple weeks ago the Clock Tower Plaza for construction, we now have a few new pre-security options for employees and travelers. Folks will find 2 Elephant's Deli shops opened, one in the ticket lobby and another one a floor below in baggage claim. The idea is essentially create more options for folks who are looking for a quick bite, grab and go kind of food. And your Northwest Travel Mart is also open in baggage claim, where you can get your bits and bobs that you've forgotten, or a newspaper or magazine. We're excited to see Evergreens and Tender Loving Empire open this month in the new Concourse E extension. Great partners. Evergreens is a salad joint. TLE folks know from Concourse T, just a great Oregon business. Real ID enforcement has once again been extended. The Department of Homeland Security extended the Real ID enforcement date by 19 months, from October 1st of this year to May of 2023, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and essentially the constraints on departments of motor vehicle being able to issue those ID cards. It really, that impact has meant that folks who were waiting and hoping to get a Real ID issued were unable to do so. So this should give folks a lot more time to get compliant. Again, the use of a non-compliant identification, a state ID or a state driver's license, beginning in May of 2023, you'll no longer be able to use a non-Real ID compliant ID to get on an airplane, get through security. You can still use a passport, but you would no longer be able to use a state ID. So a few more months to make that change. In Hillsborough, our airport runway safety area improvements are in the planning stage. We're engaging with the community. We recently published the draft environmental assessment for the Hillsborough Airport runway safety area improvements. And on our website, portofportland.com, you can sign up for our online public hearing on Tuesday, May 25th, or share comments directly if you choose. I urge anyone who's interested in that project to engage and share your perspective. And then finally, commissioners, we heard last month from a member of the public about growing concerns about homeless camping and illegal dumping occurring off 33rd. And, you know, I think like all of you, there's some pretty stunning pictures, and obviously a broader concern around the region and the city. But a few years ago, as I think we've talked about before, the challenges related to our sites became significant enough that we entered into a formal partnership with the Metro RID program, which takes a trauma-informed approach to illegal dumping and camping. And the partnership is still in place, but is short-staffed, as we talked about briefly last month, due to COVID-19 related economic impacts, and simply can't keep pace with the crisis as it stands. We'll continue working with this program to address these community concerns in a manner that really prioritizes safety and compassion for people experiencing homelessness. As far as 33rd, we've seen some really great progress over the last month. A few photos are up now. Again, the port is somewhat constrained in what we can and can't do, but the team was able to get out and clean up some of the sites that are port property. And, Heath Levitt will be back next month to share with you an update with more of the specifics about the work that's being done out there. So, Madam President, I'm sorry for a somewhat longer set of announcements this morning, but a lot going on. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Curtis. I see that Commissioner Nemi asked if you guys could share the information about the vaccination drive up this weekend for folks to be able to share out. And thank you for the update on the trash issue. I know that everyone was really concerned about that, and it's good that we have a long-term and a short-term plan around that. Want to make sure commissioners have had an opportunity to ask any questions or make comments on the report before I take a motion second to approve it. Okay, hearing none, I'd call for a motion to accept the executive director. Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Pam, would you lead us through the vote, please?
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kupro-Comas,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sampat,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. We did not receive any public comments this month, so we will move on to our general discussion items. And I'll call on Dan Pippinger to introduce the first of those.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. I can't express how excited I am to have this presentation before you today. This has been a long journey for the port. In 2015, the port conducted a corporate seismic risk assessment with the growing awareness of the Cascadia subduction zone and the threat to not only the city of Portland, but certainly the entire region, especially west of the Cascades. And that assessment was really just an analysis of our facilities and how they would perform in a major earthquake. And the scope of potential improvements that we found that were probably needed was massive. But we can't do everything, and we needed to really take a more programmatic and systemic view of seismic resilience. And so we established a resilience program. And I'll touch on it a little bit later, but the resilience program is beyond seismic to this point, but that's really what the catalyst and main point was for our development of the program. And it was really to give us a process and a system by which to prioritize where and when to invest in resilience. But today's project really took shape on a trip that I took along with Curtis, Vince Granato, and a couple other port employees to the Tohoku region of Japan in 2017, which was about 5 years after the Great East Japan earthquake, as I'm sure you'll all remember, which was on March 11th. And it also included a big tsunami. Well, I guess that's a oxymoron, but there was obviously a great loss of life and devastation to a number of communities in that area. And what that trip really showed us was the critical nature of getting communities back on their feet, both in an emergency response way, but also in a way to economically continue the community viability. And so we saw that in the United States with the Hurricane Katrina and the lack of services and transportation after the event that caused a number of businesses and people to leave New Orleans and never return. And so what do we need to do to think about our community and our state and our region? And what was most influential to us was a trip we took to the Sendai airport, which also was in the earthquake zone and also the tsunami. And the Sendai airport had a large portion of its runway seismically enhanced by the Japanese federal government. And what they were able to do was clear the runway off within a couple days of all the debris and damage and resume or start mainly military operations right away to bring aid and rescue workers into the region, which was devastated. All the transportation routes were devastated. And then within a couple weeks, they were able to resume, I'll call it rudimentary commercial service to allow people to travel if they could, both in and out of the region. And that really, I think, hit home with us on the role that we see PDX playing for our community. And so we thought about that runway quite a bit, and we thought it was a great investment, and we started working on it. But just saying that it's a great investment doesn't make it so. And so we needed some help with determining, well, how do we express the value of the runway to our community, not just by the port saying it's a good idea because we've seen what it can do in Japan. And so we, I think, creatively engaged the National Institute of Building Sciences to help us evaluate the effectiveness of an investment on the runway and what that means to our community. And that's what today's presentation is about. It'll focus on and include the experts from the National Institute of Building Sciences to present their analysis and conclusions of what an investment would look like. And just as I mentioned earlier, while the runway is the focus of the discussion today, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that this is a more part of a more holistic resilience program to include efforts to reduce vulnerabilities to both natural hazards and climate change through both physical investments, operational changes, and relationships and agreements we have with partners. So I'm super excited to have this presentation before you today. And from the port to present it, Alex Howard, our Resilience Program Manager, and Ann Gravitt, our Federal Affairs and Policy Manager, will kick it off, along with our esteemed guests from the National Institute of Building Sciences, who they will introduce in the presentation. Thank you. Alex?
Hi. Thank you for having us here today to share updates on the Resilient Runway project. Like Dan, I'm very enthusiastic about this work and really excited to be able to talk about it with the Commission today. So I'm Alex Howard, as Dan introduced me. I wear two hats here at the port. Today, I'm here for the Resilience Program. I also work on the new Trade and Equitable Development team. Next slide. So today we have three topics we'd like to address. We're going to first provide a general note about our approach to response and resilience, which you've started to hear about already. Second, we'll provide an overview of the port's resilience program, its purpose, why we started by focusing on seismic resilience. So a little bit more of what Dan has just spoken to. And third, our focus, we will turn the presentation over to our team from NIBS to share information on the benefit cost assessment they just completed on the Resilient Runway project. Next. So as you know, over the past year, the port has acted quickly to meet community needs. We've changed how we operate at PDX in response to COVID-19. We sent firefighters last summer around Oregon to deal with wildfire. And as Curtis noted earlier, we're helping Oregon Health Sciences University run a drive-through vaccination clinic at PDX, where, as you noted, over 200,000 doses have been administered, and many of us have worked as volunteers or on the incident command in this effort. At the port, we think these efforts really demonstrate our deep commitment to providing public services and meeting local needs. But critical to providing this efficient and effective short-term response is having a long-term commitment to building resilience to hazards. And that's what our program is really focused on. We couldn't meet these needs, do what we did, and continue to provide these services if we had not been building our resilience and growing our capabilities throughout. That means we're not preparing to address one event, but we're really working to build adaptability and flexibility into our systems, flexibility that we need to perform well under a variety of challenging and changing conditions. So our approach is both tactical, but it's also strategic with some longer term visioning in there. Next slide. So as Dan noted, we have a growing resilience program here at the port, and the purpose of the program is to reduce our vulnerabilities and really position us to recover adapt and get back to work after significant disruptions from natural hazards. And we are working to address a variety of physical and operational vulnerabilities. Right now, we're doing some work around climate and health. We're looking at storms. We'll be looking at high heat events, communicable disease. And we are doing this using an equity lens, knowing that our conditions are changing and who benefits from these investments matters. So through the program, we're really looking at 3 different types of work to improve our resilience. Physical investments, such as the runway that we're talking about today, operational changes, how do we run things differently to deal with these changing conditions, and agreements and partnerships. We play a critical role, but we are one player in this big region, so really working with our partners is essential to building resilience long term. Next slide. So as Dan noted, our initial focus in the program is seismic resilience, and it is where we've made the most progress. We think, given Oregon's potential of experiencing a massive Cascadia subduction zone earthquake, which you'll hear more about in the upcoming presentation, is very smart. This is a critical and core vulnerability that will take a significant amount of work to really prepare for. And we've already done a lot. So I do want to say that, Concourse E, where we have the new concessions coming, is on a resilient structural slab. We've got a new emergency operations center. We have work at T-Core. We are doing a ton of work to demonstrate our commitment to seismic resilience, which is really building our strength over the long term. Next slide. So we have really 3 main working objectives as we think about seismic resilience. We want a resilient airfield, and the runway is the critical piece to that. We're also looking at Terminal 6 as a key connection point for all of this work at the airport. And then we really want to be able to, as Dan mentioned, return to commercial air service in an efficient and timely manner. So while all those investments that we just mentioned are really critical to this work, we are confident that the most transformational seismic investment that we can make is the resilient runway. A resilient runway is one that can withstand the ground motion caused by a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. And you can see sort of the red zigzaggy fault line out there on the screen is one of the major places that we're talking about. Without a resilient runway, as Dan noted, from the earthquake in Japan, you've faced significant isolation and damage. So a resilient runway really provides a deep lifeline connection from Oregon to the rest of the world. It will make it possible for us to make the best use of our other investments. And you'll see in the NIBS presentation that's coming up, it will immensely benefit the region and the state and everyone who lives here. Next slide. So as Dan noted, we did the corporate seismic risk assessment in 2015. They took the trip to Japan in 2017. And our work on the Resilient Runway project followed very shortly thereafter. In 2018, we really started to dig in and do a significant amount of work. We worked with Oregon State University on a groundbreaking study to look at exactly what our soil conditions look like here at PDX so we can design the best investment for us. But also we can provide information now to our partners along the Columbia River who will now know a lot more about how our soils perform during an earthquake. We worked with the National Institute of Building Sciences, which we'll share. We are in the process of working with Portland State University. We're working with the School of Social Welfare, and we are also working with the Planning School together on a study to look at, to do an equity analysis, really focused around worker impacts. So what are the demographics? What's the vulnerability around who will not be employed should we not be able to operate? So that work is just getting started and we'll have results, I think, late fall of this year. And then our next phase is really to complete the engineering and to seek construction funding. And Ann Gravett, who was introduced at the beginning, will finish out this presentation and share a little information about how we're seeking the funding. So right now, I'd like to turn over the presentation to our colleagues from NIBS who will walk you through the benefit cost assessment. It's really amazing and compelling work, and I'm so excited to share it with you. We have our core project manager and our researcher here. So I'm going to turn it over to Dick Yuan, the executive director of the Multi-Hazard Mitigation Program at the National Institute of Building Sciences, and to Keith Porter of SPA Risk, who is our principal investigator for this study. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone, and it's my great pleasure to be here today. So, as Alex said, my name is Ji-Q Yuan. I'm the Executive Director for the Multi-Hazard Mitigation Council, also Building Seismic Safety Council at NIBS. Next slide. So, just want to give you a quick background who we are. So NIBS is established by the U.S. Congress back in 1979. The Congress tried to have a bridging organization between all the public sectors, also among the private sectors. So we are often viewed as a science organization trying to provide the independent, also unbiased science information for the policy making. Next slide. So for this study we just did for the Port Portland is again, it's our great pleasure to work with all of you guys to do this important study. But our journey on this study back in 2005, when the U.S. Congress asking FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, back then, if FEMA's public assistance grant is not a good investment, is not a good way to spend the taxpayers' money. So back then, NABES working with FEMA, we conducted this independent study for FEMA, try to answer that key question by the Congress. So we found, for every dollar that FEMA invested in the public mitigation field, there will be a return for $4. The 1 to 4 number, 1 to 4 return in the mitigation investment. Then back a few years ago, we expanded that study. This time, we not only include the FEMA funding, also the hard EDA, also the private sector investment. Look at how all the buildings up to the current the building code, the model building code. Also looked at going beyond the minimum code requirement. Also looked at some of the infrastructure. So for that series study, we came up many great values like 1 to 6 number that which is a direct update for the federal grant investment, which also led to I think played a very important factor for the new federal programs like the FEMA's new BRIC program, which now has $500 million every year. Not every year, for this year only, for the pre-disaster mitigation. Then for the future, the FEMA basically have the authority to spend 6% whatever they spend for the previous year on the disaster responding. That's a huge change from the federal government point of view for the pre-disaster investment. So here today in 2020 and 2021, we're very honored to work with the Port Portland on this case study to see, on the key infrastructure, what kind of return on the investment. Again, it's our great pleasure to be here today. Next slide. So I just want to quickly share some high-level pictures here. So in our series mitigation safety studies we did for FEMA, HUD, EDA, ICC, and many other organizations, we looked broadly for the nation. We also, of course, we did all the regional analysis, but we came up with the national average BCR, the benefit cost ratio. We have 1 to 4, 1 to 11. That's national average. Some of you may have heard of that before, but that's the overall for our baseline study. Then for the Portland, you will hear later today from Keith, from our principal investigator on the study, you will have 1 to 50. You can see the importance to have the key infrastructure to be ready to help the region to recover from major disasters. Again, I just want to here give you an overall view on the series studies, and the Portland study is a continuation for our that series. Next slide. So who are using these numbers in many different entities? Again, NABES is viewed as a science organization. So some of these findings often cited in the congressional hearings. For example, in the FEMA administrators confirmation, the committee cited this number, asking the FEMA new boss, what's their plan to increase the pre-disaster mitigation activities, etc. And also, I think this study led to the new policies on the BRIC program, also cited by researchers, by reporters. So again, we are very glad to be able to conduct this study, also working with the Port Portland. Next one. So I think this is my last slide before I turn to Keith. Again, I think everyone, all the people we talked to is very excited to see this case study is have a return on the 50 to 1. And again, because it's a key functionality for the airport that it plays. It shouldn't surprise people, because we know for those key infrastructures they played in the region. With that, I will turn this back to Keith. Thank you.
Thanks, JQ. Dan told you that the Resilient Runway is a great investment, and we simply quantified the return on that investment, and we can confirm that the Resilient Runway saves at least $50 per dollar spent, makes us all safer and more connected. I'm the principal investigator for this study and for the prior studies that JQ showed a little bit earlier on. Can I get the next slide, please? But this was a project by a large number of people. JQ led it. You can see the project team on the left. You can see the independent peer reviewers on the right, and we had input from several other people. Can I get the next slide, please? I want to give you the bottom line to take away. So if you take away nothing else from this presentation, I want you to take these few points away. Can I get the next slide, please? Resilient Runway is going to save over $50 per dollar spent. The cost of the Resilient Runway is estimated to be $140 million plus soft costs and contingencies, so that's sort of a lower bound. But our estimated benefit estimate of $7 billion is also something of a lower bound because it omits things like equity, jobs, and so on. The $7 billion includes these four categories, or for the categories, the top four categories shown in this slide. The value of life safety is almost $500 million through medevac. The Resilient Runway is going to speed people's returns to their homes and their workplaces. That saves almost $6 billion, helping people return to up to 600,000 safe buildings more quickly. It's going to avoid business interruption with an estimated benefit of $1.2 billion in regional and U.S. economy that's reliant on PDX. It's going to reduce repair costs of $4 million by avoiding predictable runway damage, and not included in the $7 billion figure is an estimated $170 million saved by protecting the Oregon Air National Guard's 142nd wing and make it able to fulfill its mission. Next slide, please. So let me tell you about the problem statement as it was given by the port to us. Can I get the next slide, please? The question we were asked was, it's going to cost the Port of Portland $140 million or more to remediate liquefaction on its south runway. What is the benefit in apples to apples dollar terms, or at least how much of that benefit can we express in monetary terms? Next slide, please. In order to answer that question, I want to briefly give you a sense of what a benefit cost analysis entails. Next slide, please. In overview, in a thumbnail sketch, you start by characterizing the assets at risk, the runway, the buildings in the region, and so on. Then you characterize the hazard to which those assets are exposed, in this case, the range of earthquakes. Then you characterize the vulnerability of those assets to that hazard, and that's sort of a relationship between the ground shaking and so on, and the damage that can occur. And you put those last two things together, and you can estimate the damage to the runway, damage to the regional buildings, and so on. Once you've characterized the damage, you can estimate the losses involved, the property repair costs, the life safety impacts, and the loss of function. There's a lot of uncertainties in here, so we account for all the probabilities, and we can get the present value of the future losses under as-is conditions without the Resilient Runway. We then recalculate all of those losses, the present value of all of those losses, under what-if conditions. What if you mitigate the runway? And the difference between the present value under as-is and what-if conditions is the benefit of doing the mitigation. The benefit cost ratio is simply the ratio of all the benefits from all the categories that we can quantify divided by the cost of the mitigation. That's the 50-to-1 figure. Let me tell you how that's applied to PDX's Resilient Runway. Can I get the next slide, please? Okay, so to apply that to PDX, may I have the next slide, please? We start with 5 earthquakes standing in for millions of possible outcomes. And those 5 earthquakes run a range of probabilities from 50% chance of occurrence during the next 50 years to a very low chance of occurrence, 2% chance of occurrence in the next 50 years. And each one of those, we're getting from smaller to larger earthquakes from left to right, and more frequent to more rare earthquakes from left to right. Can I get the next slide, please? In each of those earthquakes, we then estimate the benefits, starting with the safety benefit. In order to estimate the safety benefit, the value of medical evacuation, we have to estimate the damage to all the buildings in the region, in the Willamette Valley and the study region. With that building damage information, we estimate the number of severe injuries that the population experiences, and particularly the number of severe injuries that exceed the capacity of regional hospitals in terms of their intensive care units and their emergency department beds. So all those severe injuries that go beyond ICU and ED bed capacities, those are people who could die if not treated quickly in a hospital. All those people have to be medically evacuated to Seattle, to San Francisco, to Sacramento, to other places that are not as heavily impacted by the earthquake. We estimate that some of those people are going to die before they reach a hospital, so we multiply that number by 2/3, and then we multiply the number of lives saved by the regulatory value of a statistical life in order to come up with an equivalent dollar value of the safety that that having a resilient runway produces. Can I get the next slide, please? What we found was that the safety benefit, considering the constrained hospital resources, has a present value of $460 million. And that comes about because a large earthquake could injure tens of thousands of people, of which more than 2,000 would require ICU or ED care. And there are fewer than 400 vacant ICU and ED beds at any given time. We use the U.S. Department of Transportation's value of the statistical life saved of $10.2 million and the value of a severe life-threatening injury of $4.0 million. And the difference between those two figures is the value of preventing those severe injuries from becoming deaths, at least the value in monetary terms, the amount of money that the federal government would deem acceptable to save those lives. Can I get the next slide, please? The next category that we looked at is the benefit of faster building reoccupancy. That is to say, how quickly can we return people to safe buildings and workplaces. And that's affected by having a resilient runway, because if there isn't a resilient runway, the people who have to come in and evaluate the safety of buildings have to drive over highways through mountainous routes. So in order to estimate those benefits, we start by estimating the number of landslides and the bridge damage and repair time through all these, through the mountainous routes that you're seeing here. Can I get the next slide, please? Then we estimate the number of buildings that are damaged throughout the Willamette Valley, throughout the study region. We estimate the experts' travel time, the time it takes the building experts to arrive in the region, evaluate the buildings, and return the safe ones to functionality by indicating that they're safe to re-enter and occupy. We can multiply all of that time by an estimated value of the daily cost of being displaced from your home or your workplace. Can I get the next slide, please? The difference between all those experts having to drive over mountainous routes and being able to fly in through PDX has a present value of almost $6 billion. And that number is very large for several reasons. First of all, the region has a lot of older, vulnerable buildings, meaning these earthquakes are going to cause a lot of damage to a lot of buildings. and it's going to displace people from those damaged buildings. That displacement is going to most strongly affect the most vulnerable populations. And the displacement is enormous. Cascadia subduction zone earthquake can damage up to 850,000 buildings out of the region's total of about 3 million, of which 600,000 of those buildings can be safely reoccupied. Even though they've got scary looking damage, they are not unsafe to enter and occupy. Now that's 600,000 or 850,000 buildings that have to be evaluated by building safety experts. The Portland Metropolitan Statistical Area only has 180 people certified to do that safety evaluation. Now, the rest of the United States has almost 11,000 certified evaluators, but they have to be able to get to the region in order to put up those red, yellow, and green tags. So being able to fly into the airport rather than having to drive in over roads that are heavily impaired by landslides and bridge damage is enormously valuable. That's where this $6 billion figure comes from being able to get those evaluators into the region much more quickly to get people into safe buildings faster. Next slide, please. The third benefit category that we estimated was business interruption benefit. We do that by estimating the economic activity that is dependent on PDX and estimating the value of business interruption with and without a resilient runway. Having a resilient runway saves $1.2 billion in avoided business interruption costs. Next slide, please. The fourth category of benefits is property repairs. Remediating the runway before an earthquake prevents having to pay for the repairs of the runway after the earthquake. Remediating the runway beforehand avoids a present value cost of $4 million. Now, that's a very small figure compared with the $140 million cost. That's really not why you're doing this resilient runway. It's really about the other three categories and some benefit categories that we have not quantified in dollar terms. Can I get the next slide, please? So this really is an outstanding, responsible investment in risk reduction. This pie chart just recaps those figures that I've shown you. The total benefit of $7.2 billion, not including the defense benefit, most of which comes from tagging. $5.7 million is 78% of the overall benefit, but you can see the other three slices there: business interruption, health and medical, that's the medevac, and the runway repairs. The little slice, the orange slice off to the right, is the cost just shown to scale. This is a great investment. Next slide, please. I want to leave you with three conclusions. Next slide, please. First of all, 50 to 1 is a lower bound in our estimated benefit cost ratio. It's a lower bound because it omits a number of important benefit categories that we simply couldn't turn into a monetary figure. Disasters disproportionately harm disadvantaged people, and mitigation reduces that harm. We were not able to quantify the benefit to the to disadvantaged populations in monetary terms, but we recognize that it exists. Also, earthquakes isolate us, especially in the Willamette Valley. Having the resilient runway reduces that isolation. Having a resilient runway improves the safety and stability of jobs. It gets people back to work faster. The $7.2 billion figure does not include the figure that we estimated for national defense benefits. Having a resilient runway and getting people back to work and back into their homes and businesses benefits taxing authorities and creates a more stable tax revenue stream. It reduces response and recovery costs, and it provides a number of environmental benefits that we were unable to quantify. Can I get the next slide, please? Now, that 50 to 1 figure is among the most cost-effective engineering strategies for disaster risk reduction. It is not beyond belief, however. There are several mitigation strategies that produce comparable benefit cost ratios. I'm showing three of them here. requiring people to strap their water heaters to the building frame exceeds a benefit cost ratio of 50-1 in 30 California counties. Undergrounding a Minnesota electric transmission line produces a benefit cost ratio of 40-1, and adding a berm to a North Carolina water treatment plant produced a benefit cost ratio of over 30-1, according to our past studies for natural hazard mitigation saves. Can I get the next slide, please? The third takeaway, the third conclusion that I want to leave you with is that a resilient PDX and a resilient runway makes us all safer and more safely connected. And everyone in the region benefits, because anyone in the region might be the medevac patient, or might have a home or business that needs fast safety evaluation. So the benefits of a resilient runway extend far beyond the bounds of the airport to pretty much everyone in the study region. And it extends beyond the study region to the entire nation. Everyone in the nation benefits from a stable and interconnected economy, a stable tax base, lower public response and recovery costs, and a greater sense of safety and connectedness. And with that, I will say thank you and take questions if we have time. That would be the next slide.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions from the commission? I see, I'm sorry, looking at raised hands here. Commissioner Holleran.
Yes, thank you very much. Two questions. One is does the ROI only occur if there is an earthquake?
No, the benefit cost ratio, by the way, the benefit cost ratio is the return on investment plus 1. So a benefit cost ratio of 50-1 is the same as a return on investment of 51-1. But the benefit cost ratio, so it's virtually the same number. The benefit cost ratio accounts for the probabilities of earthquakes, how long into the future they may occur, how big they may be, and it gives you a present value accounting for all those probabilities.
And question number 2 is, to what level of resiliency would it be built? To what level of an earthquake? Is it a 6.0 or 9.0? And obviously, if we're building to 6 when we expect 9, that outcome is going to be very different.
We understand that the design for the resilient runway should protect that portion of the runway even from a magnitude 9.34 earthquake on the Cascadia subduction zone.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe I'll just chime in, sorry to add to that a little color. We're only trying to mitigate 6,000 feet of runway, and we've chosen the location with the best soil conditions. And the idea there is we would have to rebuild the other runway and the lengthening of the 6,000-foot runway. But 6,000 feet gets you military airlift, and it also gets you what we call Group 3 aircraft, which is 737 size aircraft. So, you know, we're trying to right-size the investment for what it's needed for the region, and then, you know, we can't save everything, so we'll build from there.
So, Dan, I don't want to digress too far, but in our new construction, are we you know, generally, are we building to a 9.0 level of protection in our new everything we're doing, not just runways?
No. So it's a mixed bag. We're choosing which pieces of infrastructure to design that to. So first of all, they're all built to code, which is set to life safety of getting people out of the building in the event of a subduction zone earthquake. Everything is built to that. We are enhancing certain facilities, including the rental car coordination center, their customer service center, the 5-story office building that'll house our emergency operations center. That is being built to not only withstand the earthquake, but actually have power and utilities after the earthquake and be usable for a period of time. You won't, you know, the building itself won't be damaged. The Concourse E extension that we just built has a structural slab on it that will allow it to be repaired. In other words, it shouldn't suffer catastrophic structural damage, and it can be repaired And then the terminal core project, the roof structure over the main terminal is going to be base isolated, so that while we will enhance the performance of the slab and the floor, the emplaning floor, we recognize we'll have to go back in and do a lot of repairs, but the building will stand and be repairable. So we're just choosing based on what we need to meet the community needs in the first 6 months, 2 years, et cetera. And as our former aviation operations director, Darren Griffin, would say when he and I would talk about this, he goes, I can run an airport out of a tent, but I can't do it without a runway.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan, for bringing this important work forward. Having just been through this year of pandemic that nobody expected, I think we can all look back and think about things we should have done or should have thought about earlier. And this is another one of those. We know the earthquake will happen, and we just don't know when, and we should be prepared. So I appreciate you bringing this work forward and all of the thought that's gone into it.
Thank you very much, commissioners.
Thank you. If we don't have other questions for Dan or for the team, I'll call on Kristen Leonard for the next item.
Great. Thank you, Madam President and commissioners. We've got a brief kind of two-part update this morning for you relating to the Lower Willamette Superfund program. And what we'd like to do is give you a brief overview on the latest port actions around our engagement with Portland Harbor, and then share an intergovernmental partnership that we think is really valuable to our community. It's focused on community health, and to share that larger partnership. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our director of the Lower Willamette program, Jessica Hamilton, to take it away.
Thanks, Kristen, and good morning, Madam President and Commissioners. I'm delighted to be here to share a few of our recent milestones, as Kristen just mentioned. Earlier this year, we signed an agreement with EPA for the remedial design at Swan Island. Swan Island is the largest and most complex site at Portland Harbor. Also, at the end of March, DEQ
Jessica.
announced... Yeah.
Hey, Jessica, it's Curtis. I'm sorry. Madam President, I think we stumbled a bit here by leaving out the federal ask piece of the last item, and we probably could proceed. Anne, do we still have you, Gravett?
Yes, I'm still here.
So I wonder, Madam President, if we should proceed, or if there's just, I think Anne's got, is it a slide, Anne? It's an important piece of this that's...
Yeah, sorry for that.
Apologies to everyone. I'm sorry. Please, if Jessica, if you don't mind, if we go back to Anne, and then we'll come back to you and Kristen. Apologies.
That sounds great.
Yeah, we thought leaving money to the end was the smart decision, but maybe we should have.
Thanks, Jessica. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, apologies, Jessica. I will be very brief. The reason we worked on the study you heard about previously is because we know we will need to seek external funding for the runway, and our focus has been on federal funding. Very briefly, I imagine you have heard that Congress is creating opportunity for congressionally directed funding, which are known as earmarks. We have put in a request for a $1 million earmark with, on the House side, we have been successful in being included in Congressman Blumenauer's list of 10 that will be advanced to the House appropriations. And that, again, is for a $1 million grant. It would come from the FEMA BRIC program that JQ mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation. We have many more steps in this process, but we are really happy to be included in Congressman Blumenauer's list of priority projects for the region. We also have had conversations with the state legislature as they've gone through a process considering how to spend some of their federal dollars. We also need a policy change. Ordinarily, airports use Airport Improvement Program grants, FAA grants. We are not eligible for these due to basically building standards. The seismic portion of the runway exceeds AIP grants, exceeds the standards. So we are looking to change AIP eligibility, and that would also be this year, hopefully, in an infrastructure legislation. So I will and let you move to Superfund. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and all important information. And please keep us updated on those efforts. Thanks very much. I guess back to Jessica, unless want to make sure commissioners didn't have questions for Anne on the funding piece before we move on.
Madam President, it's not so much a question on the funding, but I'm just curious with the scope of work, and I understand we're targeting PDX and the runway, but does any of this residual benefit towards Troutdale or Hillsborough as we look at this potential scenario, or are there lessons that can be exported to those additional facilities? And I'm not sure if our presenters have stepped off, but I'm just curious whether.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. For Troutdale, the answer would be no. It's 8 miles from PDX, and we wouldn't do a redundant investment so close. The reason PDX is chosen over Hillsborough is the size of PDX and the ability to do extensive cargo operations and the closeness to the metropolitan area where the greatest need of aid will be. We do envision possible investments in Hillsborough over time to use it as I'll call it a staging base from which you would be served by PDX. But in our discussions with the Department of Defense and with FEMA, the clear preference is for the large facility with all the services and capability at PDX. So, it's all part of a network. I know the state is working with FEMA to conduct a regional readiness assessment, and that includes some small airports on the coast, those that might be at a higher elevation, and how would you get small aircraft to the coast to do relief if there was tsunami damage. So it's all part of a bigger program, but the main investment would be at PDX.
Thank you, Dan.
So this is
Pat, please.
Yes. In addition to the airport, are there port facilities that are part of the resiliency plan? Being new, I don't know, this might have already been reviewed at some other time, so just wanted to understand that.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. We have done an investment at the Marine Terminal 6 on the Columbia River. Back maybe about 10 years ago, we did some seismic upgrades to the dock structure at berth 604 and 605 to stabilize those docks in the event of a Cascadia subduction zone. And we are working with the state on how the state plans to bring large quantities of both fuel and building supplies, relief supplies, et cetera, into the region. The Columbia River provides a great avenue for that. Pardon me. It has a couple key problems. That is the Astoria Bridge and the Longview Bridge. But they can be cleared, I don't want to say easily, but certainly the military has that capability to clear debris. But the volume of material brought in by seagoing barge from either the Puget Sound area or the San Francisco Bay area would far dwarf anything provided in either an airlift or truck convoys from east of the Cascades. And so the state resilience officer, Mike Harriman, has been considering all these multimodal strategies, and we consider T6 as part of that strategy. So that's where we have made an investment before, and we would possibly look at future investments because you don't need you just need the wharf. You can move lots of cargo different ways without certain equipment, even pump fuel from the barge itself. The barge itself could be the storage tank. So there's, great opportunity, I think, on the maritime side of relief coming in through the Columbia River Bar. There's challenges with navigation and shifting sediment in the event of the earthquake, but I believe personally that a lot of those can be overcome in relatively short order. But it wouldn't be the same as a deep draft channel we have today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on this portion of the presentation? Okay. Thanks very much, Dan and team. And we'll go back to Jessica. Again, apologies, Jessica, for my...
Look, I'm always happy to share good news twice. So if I had something terrible to be sharing today, I might have been a little bit more disappointed. But since it's all great news, then I'm pretty happy to be able to share it again. So as I was saying, we have a few key milestones that we wanted to share with you before I introduce my colleague from the county, Beth. But earlier this year, we signed an agreement with EPA for remedial design at Swan Island. That agreement represents the largest and most complex site in the harbor. And so the port team is really proud to have partnered with public and private entities to do that. Also, at the end of March, DEQ announced the selection of its remedy at the Willamette Cove Upland site. This marks an important step in the nearly 2-decade-long cleanup process and will allow cleanup to actually go forward. And finally, we are just wrapping up a year of formal facilitated collaboration between governments and community partners at the Willamette Cove Roundtable, and that has been really great work for my team and others to have participated in. A common theme with all of this is partnership. The sheer size, scale, complexity, and cost of Superfund makes progress without partnership impossible. Without partnerships, we wouldn't be able to announce the agreement that I just talked about at Swan Island, those public and private entities that have stepped forward to fund and perform this important work. And with this agreement, EPA has been able to announce that 100% of the river is now under design, which is great news. We also continue to make steady progress under our other agreements with EPA at Terminal 4, Willamette Cove, and Terminal 2. Finally, as our relationships with our community leaders both deepen and broaden, we are pleased to support community leaders' efforts to create a new community-led space for partnership, the Portland Harbor Collaborative, Community Collaborative. One of our most important partnerships is the one we've developed with Multnomah County Environmental Health. The port, the city, and the state have funded Multnomah County to reach, engage, and educate community members most at risk from the contamination at the harbor. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Beth Oppert. Beth is a program specialist with Multnomah County. She has been leading this effort for the last several years and has worked with us since the beginning of this multi-year effort. Beth?
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Madam President and Commissioners, for having me here today. I really appreciate the support of the port. And as Jessica said, my name is Beth Oppert, and I work with the Fish Consumption Outreach Program at the county. And I want to say all of this talk about vaccinations out at the airport is really making me excited, coming from a public health background. So kudos to you all. Next slide, please. So in this short presentation, I'd like to go over some of the milestones we had in the first year. I was hired in this position in April of 2018, and then we did a lot of outreach in the second year from January to December of 2019. And then things changed, and outreach in the time of COVID from January 2020 to present, and what we're doing moving forward. Next slide, please. So this slide might be a little bit hard to see, but it goes over some of the high points in that first year, from April when I was hired to May, when I started to meet with different stakeholders and key players in the lower Willamette River Portland Harbor Superfund site. It was a new area to me, so it was quite exciting to meet everyone and get their perspective. In June, I was introduced at the first EPA quarterly meeting that I attended and shared some of my vision for this program. In July, started the first neighborhood outreach, going to Sunday parkways, and then continued to do a number of outreach activities like that throughout the program. In August, I applied and was able to hold a small workshop at the ORCHWA conference. And ORCHWA stands for Oregon Community Health Worker Association. And this is a key activity that led into a lot of the future work. In September, I was able to hold my first workshop with the Slavic or Eastern European community. And I'll talk more about those workshops and how they really designed the work moving forward. In October, I met with ERCO, and many of you probably know they're well connected in some of the communities that are impacted quite a bit by the fish advisory because they ate some of the resident fish. And then in November, held my second workshop among the Vietnamese community. And in December, held a small gathering of some key legislators and government officials out at the St. John's area in order to talk about what we're doing moving forward. Next slide, please. So the workshops were based in human-centered design, and my next slide will tell you a little bit more about that. But there were 10 different workshops held with key community-based organizations, and you can see them listed here. It tells you the name of the community-based organization and then the community that they work with. And it was really exciting to work with all of these groups. Most of them are pretty obvious. When you look at the Portland Harbor Insiders, that might not be so obvious. That was a group of folks that could be public agency members. There were some neighborhood association members and some folks that work with the houseless community. And then finally, the Portland Harbor Community Coalition helped promote and were the sponsors for 2 of the workshops. Next slide, please. So this is a picture from one of our workshops. And as I said, we used human-centered design. We took a problem statement that was that resident fish are unhealthy to eat from the lower Willamette River, and folks eating those fish are not getting the message. So we built upon that problem statement and used different activities to design tools to reach those specific communities. First of all, we talked about what is the fish advisory, what do you already know about the problem, how do you like to receive health messages, and what will you design to convey that message? So we were co-creating with the communities and incorporating their local context. We know that one size doesn't fit all, so we wanted to be most impactful in the communities that we were targeting. And by the end of each workshop, there were several outreach tools that had been designed, and then we voted on the one that was the favorite for the group. Next slide, please. So you can see that we held the 10 workshops from November of 2018 to July of 2019. The key messages that came out of these workshops were not earth-shattering, but they confirmed what we thought would resonate with communities, that resident fish are unhealthy to eat. There are health risks to eating those fish in that section of the river, and a clean environment benefits everyone. And then they tailored their outreach to many different methods: radio, social media, newspaper, events, a game, trainings. Next slide, please. So I would like to highlight just a couple quotes from these workshops. And this is a picture from Utopia PDX's workshop. I was happy to hear that the community actually was excited about planning change, and that they really appreciated learning more about what was good for their health, and that they want these activities to continue. And the highlight in that third quote really is exciting. This was the best government hosted workshop I've ever attended, and best examples of implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And of course, that's our hope, but we don't always hit the mark. So it was really exciting to hear that folks felt like they were really making the change. Next slide, please. Here are a couple examples of tools that came out of these workshops, and we're just in the beginning stages of developing all of them, but we attended the Slavic Family Festival in September of 2019 and had a booth where there was a fishing game where it drew in children, but often their families would come with them. So it was a chance for them to fish for resident fish and migratory fish, and then identify on a poster which were healthy and which were unhealthy to eat from the river. And then in their booklet that every attendee was handed was also this fish advisory template that we designed in Russian, along with some background information about the Portland Harbor. And then we also design things for social media like Facebook. And we found out that doing something interactive reaches more people than just giving information. So we developed an interactive quiz about eating fish from this section of the river and translated it into Vietnamese, Russian, and English. And that had a lot of hits. Next slide, please. Another activity was with the community members was to design a logo that we can use for branding. And the tagline that came out of these workshops was "Know your river, know your food." And then a local artist developed this picture. It's not exactly to scale, but it shows the St. John's Bridge with the Portland skyline and then 3 of the resident fish in the river. And we'll be using this as we move forward. Next slide, please. Another idea was to develop a game, and this came out of the Vietnamese workshop, because they figured it's good to educate children as well as adults, and this would get families to learn about the fish advisory. So here are some prototypes of bass, mussels, and salmon that will be used in the Go Fish game, along with some educational materials that will be included. Next slide, please. And then during COVID, we planned some outreach programs with WIC, the Women, Infant, and Children program in East County. And they have a lot of nutrition educators that were willing to co-teach a class on eating healthy fish, and then how to know when fish is unhealthy and how to find out where your fish is from, and then give some education about the lower Willamette River fish advisory. It was not as easy to do online as it would have been in person, but we carried it off and had some technical difficulties, but the information was spread among about 3 different groups, and we hope to continue and do this more in person, because pregnant and parenting and small children are some of the most vulnerable folks when we're talking about eating these contaminated fish. Next slide, please. And then looking forward, we hope to continue training community health workers in this region. During the pandemic, we applied for some CEU or continuing education credits through the Oregon Health Authority's Office of Equity and Inclusion. And they granted this application so that we can hold these workshops that are very interactive with community health workers to train them about the river and the harbor and the fish advisory, and then evaluate them to see how they're using that in their communities and how much information they're retaining after they have been trained. So we'll do an evaluation about 6 months after the training. So this has been delayed, you can imagine, because of the pandemic, but we hope to do our first one in September of this year. And it also involves getting on a boat and getting out on the river down at St. John, so people can actually visualize the area that we're talking about. And this is something that I'm really passionate about, because it seems like it will have the most long-term impact within these communities because of cleanup taking such a long time. We hope to continue training and doing some more classes with folks throughout the years. Next slide, please. We also have a small group of fisher folk that are looking at the fish advisory signs that are out there right now. And we also have looked at the sign that's up at the Lower Duwamish in Seattle to decide what's the most effective signage that we can use. So we know this is just one way to reach people, but we want to make it most impactful in the communities that are eating the fish from the river. We're also looking at doing a fishing derby, maybe in the fall, with these fisher folk promoting it. So we'll see how that goes as well. Next slide, please. So that's it. That's a picture from our final workshop. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. And if you'll go to the next slide, I'll also leave you with my contact information if you think of something that you aren't able to ask today and would like to follow up with. I'm happy to take questions via that phone call or our phone number or email. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the partnership with the folks at the port. All the work is really important, and you know, public health is the health of our community. We need to be thinking about how we engage there. So thank you for that. Any questions for Ms. Appert from the commission? Okay.
Thank you.
I also wanted to acknowledge what Jessica said and the good news that you brought, Jessica, about the arrangements that we've made and the commitments and partnerships that we've entered into, to know that all of the river, or all of the affected portion of the river, is under design now is a huge movement forward. And I know that the port's own leadership really helped with that. So thank you to all the port folks for the work there. It's magnificent. Hearing no further questions, we're going to move on to the consent items, and I'll ask if any commissioner wants a presentation on the consent items. I'll read the titles. They are Personal Services Contract, On-Call Resources, Environmental Consulting Services, Port of Portland Properties, and Personal Services Contract, Mitigation and Undeveloped Land Management Services, Port of Portland Properties. If you need a presentation, please raise your hand.
Madam President, I don't need a presentation, but I do want to acknowledge, in reviewing the detail, the additional sort of depth and scope of commentary on shared prosperity that was included within each of them. I do want to acknowledge that clearly that work is permeating everything that emanates from the port, and I want to acknowledge and applaud the staff and the leadership for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I agree. I appreciated the social equity focus that was included, and not just business terms, in the presentations that we received. If we have no other questions or comments on these, I will call for a motion and second for approval of the consent items.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Pam.
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kupro-Comas,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sampat,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. We'll move on to the first action item, which is Antoinette Chandler will introduce.
I think Antoinette had to go over to another meeting. So I don't know if Curtis wanted to say a few introductory remarks, or I can start into the agenda item.
I'm just looking. I think you can just start into it. I think the commission's aware of what's coming. So why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay. So if we could advance the slides a little bit here. So good morning. This agenda item requests the Commission approval of the Port of Portland's fiscal year 21-22 budget and authorization to submit it to the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So just to quickly recap where we're at in the process, we began with a public hearing on our budget last month, and we're here today seeking your approval of the Port's budget to submit it to the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission, where on June 9th, following the Port Commission meeting, staff and commissioners will meet with the TSCC for their review and public hearing on the Port's budget, and we expect to receive their approval of our budget. And then finally, on June 29th, following the TSCC's approval, we will request that the Commission formally adopt our fiscal year 21-22 budget. Next slide, please. So following the public hearing last month, we've made some refinements and adjustments to the budget. The exhibits to the agenda item in your packet outline the changes between the proposed budget and the budget submitted to you today. And the primary drivers of those changes include refinements to our aviation forecast as a result of higher projected passenger volumes. As a reminder, passenger volumes directly influence revenues such as terminal concessions, parking, rental car, as well as passenger facility charge and customer facility charge fees. In addition, higher passenger volumes result in higher operating expenses such as janitorial and some of our other outside services costs. The proposed budget was based on 5.8 million in-plane passengers, and working with our consultant, Campbell Hill, and based on the trends that we're seeing with the increased vaccination and airlines adding flights and the increase in leisure travel, the approved budget submitted today is based on 6.3 million in-plane passengers and the associated adjustments to our revenue and expense forecasts. For the general fund, we've made some refinements to our operating expenses in the areas of personal services and refined benefit costs associated with employee health savings accounts, as well as outside services and refinements to our drainage assessment fees. As a reminder, the budget provides a funding plan for actions that have been approved by the Commission and for planning purposes, anticipated actions or initiatives that may require further Commission review and approval prior to implementation. And as previously noted, these adjustments are primarily refinements to our budget to reflect updated and better forecasts. Next slide, please. So at this time, staff requests approval of the Executive Director's recommendation to approve the Port of Portland's fiscal year 21-22 budget and authorize its submittal to the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission.
Thank you very much. I'll say at the outset, I appreciate the just-in-time information and how it reflects sort of refinements as we've gotten more information, particularly in the COVID era, about how travel is changing. And also your point, Suzanne, that many of the expenditures will require further Commission action, which gives us an opportunity to course correct if we don't continue to see the improvements that we are expecting. So thank you for that. Any questions from the Commission? Okay, seeing no raised hands, I will call for motion and second to approve the fiscal year 21-22 budget.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, I'll ask Pam to lead us through the roll call vote, please.
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kouprokomis,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sampat,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last agenda item will be introduced by Dan Pippinger.
Good morning again, Commissioners. In the theme of good news, this is a request for approval of a 3-year extension of a collective bargaining agreement between the Port and the District Council of Trade Unions, also referred to generally by DCTU, that represents the 17 employees at our marine facility maintenance. The agreement covers 3 years, starting this July, and here to present it is Blaise Lamphere, our labor manager. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners. As Dan mentioned, very pleased to report a 3-year extension to the existing DCTU Port agreement for marine maintenance employees. Next slide, please. This agreement focused on initially DCTU proposed the notion of an extension in March. The DCTU consists of 7 trade unions, and one of our goals, as you know, is keeping trade pipelines open as we proceed here in this current challenging time. So they proposed an extension, potential extension in March. We reached ground rules as an alternative track in case any ratification vote failed. Pleased to report the ratification vote did succeed in April. Year 1, key terms, there's a wage increase of 2%. Year 2, 2.95%, with a $1 an hour market adjustment for classifications specifically that we were able to target the operating engineer position and the plumber position. And in year 3, a 2.5 to 4% based on CPIW West Class A cities, second half that would be reported in January of 2023. We get there on wages consistent with looking at external market factors for trade. We look primarily at public sector, and we're certainly used to doing that for positions like police and fire that are essentially, we are competing exclusively with public sector. In this case, we must acknowledge we are competing with private sector as well, and wish to level the playing field to compete for that talent. So we're very cognizant of those trends. I will note this as well.
Looks like we lost Blaze. Oh, Blaze, we have you back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. One of the things that we have focused on, there was mention this morning of the shared prosperity lens. One of the things we are looking at is maintaining solid family wages. We were able to reach that in terms of where we are in the first year of this, and also looking at what's happening in the next two. In this previous contract that we're extending, we did reach flexibility under our training article to utilize unions and management's existing apprenticeship program, if those exist, with a joint apprenticeship training committee, otherwise known as a JATC in the private sector. If that's applicable, we will use those where they are available and piggyback on those groups, while we retain the right to target a specific trade and a specific union, so that we can negotiate primarily with that union if there's a need in a particular area. An example is currently plumbing. The plumbing position, we have a strong interest in bringing an apprentice through the plumbing program, and so we are working very closely with the rep in that regard specifically. Next slide, please. And the way it breaks down for new dollars, and I will note that with this $611,000 over the 3 years, you have, with 2 of these fiscal years, we have what are called PERS spike years, where there's an increase in the PERS cost on the employer side of that formula with the state. And so that buoys some of this increase, and a substantial amount actually if you theoretically had no wage increase over these 3 years, you would still have over $300,000 in new money that would occur without that wage increase, and that would be attributable to PERS and increases in healthcare, but primarily it is PERS that would constitute 52%, nearly 52% of this $611,000 amount. Next question, or next slide, please. So we are seeking approval to enter into a 3-year collective bargaining agreement extension with the DCTU, and I would be happy to answer questions about this at this time.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Any questions from the Commission? Okay, seeing none, I'll call for motion and second to approve the Executive Director's recommendation.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, Pam, would you lead us through the roll call, please?
Commissioners Alexander,
Aye.
Kupro-Comas,
Aye.
Lamb,
Aye.
Levy,
Aye.
McDonald,
Aye.
Nemi,
Aye.
O'Halloran,
Aye.
Sampat,
Aye.
and Strader.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you very much, commissioners. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care, all.
You too.